welcome to the 5th Annual Guild of Music Supervisors State of Music in Media Conference.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Mara Kuge. This is the A&R in the Age of Sync panel. We have 2 A&R people and 2 sync people and some people who've done a little bit of both. And we are going to talk about how the 2 departments work together, especially since, as everyone here knows, sync has become a much bigger area in the past 15 years or so. And the way that A&R has been done didn't traditionally figure it in as much as it's doing now. So we're going to see, we are going to see how the 2 departments work together. But first, I would like everyone on the panel, starting with Mr. Jonathan Palmer, to introduce themselves and say a little bit about what you do.
Sure. I'm Jonathan Palmer. I'm the Senior VP of Creative Sync at BMG for North America. I head up our Creative Sync outreach for all media across our recorded repertoire and our published repertoire.
Great. Hi, I'm Ron Broitman, and I oversee Sync for Warner Chappell and for the Warner Music Group. And so we work with all of the frontline labels, Catalog, and Nashville, and the worldwide labels as well, along with the Warner Chappell Sync department combined into one.
Hi, I'm Katy Wolaver. I am VP of A&R at Warner Chappell. I work mostly in our pop department with our writers and artists and work in international as well across different genres.
And I'm Jaime Kinelski, Vice President of A&R for Cobalt Music Publishing. And yeah, I work across a bunch of different genres, pop, indie, hip hop, R&B. Yeah, just like to have fun while I'm doing the do.
Cool. So my first question is directed towards the A&R people here. What do you guys think makes a song good for sync or an artist? What would you guys be looking for if you were looking for something sync friendly?
I don't know. I feel like I'm always wrong. Like, I always feel like I'm like, this will be great for sync. And then I play it for our sync team and they're like, this is not going to work.
Well, that can happen. That's why I asked. Like, what would be the traits of the song?
Great way to start, by the way. I love that.
You know, I'm always just like, well, if it has claps, whistles, or the word home in it, I'm sure it's gonna work, right?
Well, you're not wrong. You're not wrong about that.
I think emotion-evoking music, I think, is what people respond to internally on our team, and I think externally on supervising, in the supervision community. I think it's things that are going to enhance the storytelling aspect of film and TV. At least that's what I look for. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, exact same. I'm usually wrong, and I definitely was wrong all the time when I first started at Warner, but Wendy and Ron have kind of nailed it into my head as to what people look for, which is non-romantic themes and universal stuff. I'm with her on the home and just anything that feels kind of anthemic. That's usually the songs that I will send their way and push over.
And now the sync side here. What do you guys think? Like, what are you looking for mostly in to make a song sync friendly? And just thinking in terms purely of sync.
Yeah, no, I was going to jump in with like sort of a broader thing. A number of years ago, we were having a listening meeting with the entire A&R staff and my sync department at my previous company. And my staff came and they're like, how honest can we be? And it's political and all that stuff. And I'm like, no, just be cool, but you gotta, you're the pros, you gotta be honest. And so we started evaluating songs, and some of the times it was like 30 seconds in, a minute in, and there's a whole analysis that goes on. And the head of A&R, I'll never forget this, sat back and said, wow, you guys listen to music differently. And for me, that was like this glorious moment, because this was an opinionated individual and a successful individual in their space, as we were, but we kind of try to be good corporate players and all that. But this was it was one of those things. So we listen to music differently, I think, is kind of. And
can you explain a little bit how, when you say you listen to music differently, what are some of the things that you look for that an A&R department might not have thought of?
I mean, there's so many layers to it, but if you start with, if you're listening for lyrics, then as we've sort of been touching on certain lyrical themes, if it's too specific, too story-oriented, too geographical, like all those things that kind of make it its own body of work where it can't really sit and live with something else, Universal, all the stuff we touched on. Then you listen for the music, and you listen for feel and vibe and swagger and energy and build and stops. And so then it just becomes a very different analysis. And so because of some of that stuff, we put together this silly thing that some of my staff like laugh at, but it's been brilliant because it's been so effective. And we call it the anatomy of a sync song. And it's evolved and developed over the years, and it's like a 4-page document basically that you give to like a manager who's new or somebody that thinks they know sync.
I love that. I love that
and
because
it's
like...
really, and we update it every year. We're like, these are the songs we're competing against. These are the bands we're competing against. And this silly little thing has lived for probably 8, 10, 12 years now. Yeah. So.
Yeah, we take an approach that's similarly analytic in terms of how we gauge what's going to work, but we also are very adaptable to the know it when you hear it kind of approach. I worked when I was at Columbia Records in sync on the first Foster the People album, and I always think back to Pumped Up Kicks, their signature song, which is a song about a school shooting. It didn't matter that the lyrics were about a school shooting. It synced across so many different things before it was a hit, too. I mean, a lot of people say, well, that's because it was a hit and people wanted to put a hit song in their scene use, but the song just had the vibe that people liked.
And
so
didn't Mark Foster work in production music or
He did.
something
He was
before?
at
So I think that would have
Music House.
Yeah, he was at
really
Mophonics.
helped.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very down with the whole, figure out what works best in terms of builds and stops and all that sort of stuff, and the lyrics being adaptable for multi-purpose use. But I also, I'm fairly heretical in saying this. I feel like there's no 100% right formula for what's going to work for placing a song. So it really just,
Right, because if there are people, I always tell people, if there were a magic formula, I would tell it to you. I'm not keeping it a secret. It's just that there isn't really a magic formula that works.
But we can create, guidelines and roadmaps for people to navigate for sure.
So for those of you who have created sync kind of guidelines, how would you say those guidelines have evolved in the past decade or so? Like, what are kind of the new things you see coming up that are being added for the past couple of years?
Well, it's a bit of a cliche, I guess, but you could talk about trailerizing. All right, great. You could talk about covers and reimagining and new voicings. I mean, all that stuff. I mean, I'm not trying to be snarky. It applies, but ultimately, to try to get ahead of it as a science in a way, to me, kind of feels a little fake and really not at the heart of the business.
Well, and I think our clientele can also tell when we're trying too hard. Mm-hmm. It's like if you have something like the phrase, and this is also fairly blasphemous for me to say, but when people say "great for sync," my skin kind of crawls a little bit. I know we're all looking for things.
That's like the soft A&R pass. It's this will be great for sync.
I gotta go, guys.
Sorry, guys.
Now, for those of you on the A&R side, how often do you run potential signings by the sync department for them to evaluate before you sign them?
I would say most of the time. I've gotten in the habit of inviting sync into my signing meetings when I'm trying to court somebody, because they tell a different side of the industry than I can, and also getting their feedback as to if it's going to work and how the music flows for them is really important when I'm making my decision. So I just bring them on in and start it off that way.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think outward facing, looking in, I think artists and managers have this idea that sync is easy because there's so much media being produced now more than ever. And we're in the management of expectations business most of the time on our end. So,
we are too.
so it's I don't want to sign something that is not going to work if sync is a priority to this artist, because I don't, if the team's not invested and they're not excited about it, then it's just they're not going to be a happy client in a year and a half, and that doesn't reflect well on anybody. So I really value the opinion of our team.
And it's important for us to get in as early as possible too, because there might be a moving conversation going on about an opportunity that lines up right with a first single coming out in an album campaign, or a writer might be interested in writing specifically for film. that we can plug into right at the beginning of the campaign and build those relationships effectively.
Well, but I think the relationship is really the relationship here. I mean, that's where it starts. And
Yeah.
we've all had sort of the spectrum of good and bad, where you come in and you say, hey, the song isn't going to work. We're not going to be able to do much with it. And you can state all the reasons. And then the answer is, yeah, but we paid a lot of money and it's a really important priority for the head of A&R, or whatever the hell the reason is, right? Like that, you can get lost in that nonsense. Then you don't have this type of dynamic, and then it's a lose-lose. So I think you really have to be able to have an honest dialogue with your own people, regardless of title and role and all that crap.
And I know we've also all had cases, I'm sure, where you have a writer who says they're really interested in sync, and the deeper you get into the conversation, you find out they're really not in some ways, or they're interested in a specific kind of thing,
Right.
and maybe not licensing their music across all TV, and for brands, maybe they just want to do film or a very specific kind of film. So that's meaningful to get into those conversations early, because then we can figure out, like, oh, this is what they actually mean.
Or they might not really understand what like writing to brief means, and
Right.
like, what that process entails and how time consuming it is, and how quick the turnaround is. It's like, oh yeah, I could totally do that, but then you don't check your email for 12 hours and you miss an opportunity,
and it goes away.
So it's like, education is a big part of it from the onset, actually teaching them before we get into business, like, this is what it looks like, and are we gonna be good partners to one another?
Right. The worst, I think, is an artist that's begging for syncs. You get them something, and it's cool, and then you don't hear back for 24 hours, and the supervisor has moved on, and then 2 weeks later, they finally check their email, and they're like, is this opportunity still open? It's like, no, the show aired last week. Of course it's not open. Well, how much would you say that you guys listen to each other's advice on what's friendly for sync versus, maybe saying, well, yeah, but not really. Like, say you've got an artist and they want sync, you bring them in, sync team says it's not gonna work for sync at all, but you still really wanna sign them for other reasons. Like, how do you kind of negotiate that?
I mean, if the specific song doesn't work, I've kind of come under lately of getting my artists and writers in specific sessions or writing camps to write for specific briefs, because a lot of times they'll come in with songs that don't work, but their vocals may work. So I really talk to them and get their opinion about it, and if we say, like, their profile, their voice will work, but these songs are not fitting at all, then we'll kind of get together and give them the right direction to work with the right people for the right purpose, and hopefully get songs that they can then work.
Yeah.
But their opinion and advice is very important, because at the end of the day, they do this, we don't, and we have to kind of know how our artists and writers can fit into their world.
Well, I'm going to probably contradict myself throughout this, but I'm going to say that if A&R is solely looking for modeling and signing for sync, then they're not doing their job. Like, that's not what this should be.
Agreed.
Absolutely.
And then we kind of do all this in the middle. Thank you, whoever that was. Thank you. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we had an instance recently where a writer was really interested in just writing for sync. It was a deal we were looking at, and they really didn't. There wasn't really strong support in other areas, so it turned into, is that a compelling enough reason to do a publishing deal just because something's great for sync? In some cases it might be, but even in those instances, I would want it to be moving towards a more holistic deal for that writer, because nothing happens in a vacuum. We need touch points. That's everything. I think for proper publishing and labeled deals, it needs to be, for frontline development, you need to be integrated across the board.
Because one thing I get, I have my own publishing company, Superior Music Publishing, and a lot of people come to me who basically they've had a couple songs on TV shows, they want to get more syncs, and they want to put out an album and then not tour behind it or hire a publicist or get a manager, and it's like, well, and then I get a lot of, well, there's people who write for sync all the time, and it's like, yeah, it's true they do, but there's you definitely, if you want to not be competing against like hundreds and hundreds of them, you've got to build your own story. You've got to be an actual artist who's doing the thing, either touring or getting cuts on albums or something like that. And what do you guys say to these people who just want to really kind of put out records and hopefully get some syncs, but not really have the infrastructure behind them?
Well, again, everyone and their mother is getting syncs these days. Like it's a different business now than it was for some of us many years ago, as far as access and relationships and just how music is distributed. So like when I hear yeah, I'm getting syncs, I'm like, okay, well, great, good for you. Keep getting your syncs, you know? But if you talk about a major company relationship and what a publisher does and what a label does, and I mean, that's one part of the story. So, I don't dismiss it, but it's kind of like, well, great. Like there are ways for you to get syncs without us.
Right.
You're
I usually
fine.
send people like that to one of the licensing companies that just does licensing and,
And then some people want to deal in volume and just get a lot of placements, and probably production music libraries are a better approach for them.
I agree.
And that I think we've seen sort of there's been a bit of a graying of the dividing lines between labels and publishers and third party and production music houses and music libraries, and that's something we've got to be mindful of as we navigate through, because that affects the deal structure that we're doing on the licensing end with music supervisors and clearance folks. But everybody has to find their lane and figure out where their music is best suited. And it's not hierarchical to my way of thinking. It's just it's where do you work? So.
What do you guys think when you're approached with people like that? Do you kind of stop them on the A&R side before it even gets too far? Or, people who just want to put out some music but not really tour or anything behind it, but are hoping to get a lot of syncs and things like that?
I think there's some artists that are really great at it, that have just had lots of success, but it's definitely like the exception, not the rule. I think a supervisor, my perception is everybody wants to feel invested in the success of real artists. I think supervisors and people at studios and networks, they feel like a part of the process. If they give that artist their first sync and then they go on to big success, it's like they want to feel like they're a part of the process with real, authentic artists.
That's what I tell to these writers all the time who just want to not tour, not do anything, they're like, but it's a good, doesn't it matter if it's a good song? And sometimes they get a little bit defensive over it. I'm like, well, it's better to be a good song, but it's better to be a good song from an up-and-coming band that's going to tour.
With a story.
With a good story.
Yeah.
And then when people Shazam it, they find the story, and then, Chop House in 6 months can be like, hey, we broke, whatever. It would have been Snow Patrol, a while ago, or anything like that,
Yeah, but I think that the problem there is people connect the dots in the way they want to connect them, and usually they're wrong as far as the backstory and the information. So you always hear about these songs or these bands that broke over one sync. Typically, that's not what happened. There's a whole life of shit that happened before that that led up to it, and a lot of people working, and by the way, a little bit of luck, and ultimately, somebody liked this because it worked to that. I mean, it's a demand-driven business. So there's just a lot of noise and misinformation. That's why when I hear there was a time it was TV is the new radio, and then you're just like your skin crawls, right? Because you're that's this tip of this whole conversation,
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what the point was, but just.
So, A&R people, are you guys being asked by those above you to specifically sign artists that will generate syncs, or do they want you to keep that in mind when you're signing things, or is it just kind of basically, have you been getting more direction to sign artists that will generate syncs?
No.
Okay, good.
Agreed. It's the way that I've, my current bosses and the way I've been brought up creatively by people that I've had the pleasure to get to work for is you have to go with your instincts of what you love and what you respond to as an A&R person, and hopefully other people will like it. And it's because, and like I said before, if I'm that sounds like it'll work for sync, I'm usually wrong. Because we listen to things differently, and it's just, the answer is a hard no.
Good. No, I like that. So then as far as projections and things like that, I know obviously you guys get projections for sync, but is that kind of factored into the budget of the artist when you're trying to figure out what's going to recoup? All right, you guys have some things to say.
We do factor it in when we're doing the initial deal model and stuff. But back to Jamie's point, we can't let that drive it 100%. At the end of the day, sync is not what we as A&R people are driven by. We are driven by radio and by trying to break these artists in the most authentic way. And sometimes that's not going to be by sync.
Yeah. And just because something has performed really well in the past at sync doesn't mean it will in the future. You know?
Absolutely.
And
Right, so
just because
imagine the absurdity of looking at a piece of paper and there's like a historical line that said year 1, 100,000, year 2, 120,000, year 3. So we averaged it out and we think you're gonna maintain 120,000, like this is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and then you look into it and you're like, yeah, that's because they had a massive piece of a hit that in the
And then it
2-year
renewed
period
the
that-
next year, which will
Yeah.
never happen again. So
Right.
really, it's a $30,000 business.
Yeah, and a lot of times you look at it and you're like, that was a
But-
hit that was very specific to that moment in time, and I don't even see this artist.
No, we get it.
doing
It's a
that really.
business, and you have to treat it as a
Yeah.
business, but you can't just be so medicinal about it. And I
Right.
think the reason we kind of joked is we've had really good situations where we've talked things through. We've had others where I'm like, wait, who put these numbers in?
Yeah. Well, can you give me some examples of good situations that have worked out where you've talked things through?
I mean, I do like, I know a lot of folks are reluctant to go on the record as
Yeah,
saying
not
like,
us. Don't, you have to, don't
no,
have to
no,
make
no,
me
no,
answer
I
anything.
mean,
That's what I thought you were asking. That's why I went,
I mean,
No, I
if
don't
you want
mean-
to, but you could say we had this one artist who was thinking. You know.
No, I mean, I think there are some creative sync people who kind of run from the how much do you think this is going to bring in sync in the next few years and do it only reluctantly. I don't have a problem with getting in that conversation because I do think there has to be some accountability from us in terms of what we think something's going to be able to do. So I can't think of anything that specifically
well, no,
where
but
I
the
got,
answer
like,
is
burned on it,
if there's a
but-
history and there's
Yeah.
like an average sort of thing, the answer is, well, it's going to be about that.
Yep.
I mean, that's what it's going to ultimately even out to.
And sometimes you feel like, well, let's push that down a little bit because of the
Yeah,
things
it is
we
all
talked
about managing
or-
expectations for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also we have to distinguish between frontline and catalog.
Yep.
Because a sync and catalog.
Definitely.
Managing a catalog business from a sync point of view is a very different thing than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And so that models differently as well.
Yeah,
But that's a different
explain-
panel, I think.
Well, yeah, but quite a very brief explanation of how it models differently.
Oh, God.
Well, catalog, you have past performance.
Right,
to-
past
to
performance, and
right.
also you can see if it was a catalog that went like this,
Right.
or a catalog that is going like this, you know?
And you
Well,
can
right,
identify outliers or steady business and all that sort of
Well,
stuff.
but I think the sync business dictates some of that as well, because there were years where depending on television production and advertising and video games and how that's all evolved, you'd have songs that could get synced over 100 times in 1 year. And that's just like everyone celebrates, it feels good, and it just falls out of the sky sometimes. But I think because there's so much more volume both on the content creation side, but the way music is being output in such a different way, that now, like if you look at your top volume sync list, you don't have songs getting 100 plus syncs. It's sort of like 20 to 30, 30 to 40, but that's because Ellen used it 15 times in 2 weeks as a walk-on, you know? So the volume game has changed a little bit, and that affects catalog and frontline and how you view the two.
Yeah, interesting. Now, for sync people, how often do you bring the A&R department, and I know it's gonna be different based on different companies, but how often do you bring the A&R department something that you are interested in having signed? Like for you guys, can you just sign whatever you want, basically?
No, but.
I mean, not whatever, but I mean, let me rephrase it.
Sadly, it's
When you
none of
say
our
people, do you
money.
guys
I
have
wish it
signing
was.
power on your own versus having to bring it through A&R?
We can, but full disclosure, I've been heading up Creative Sync at BMG since December, and we've been building up our team, and it hasn't really been as much of a priority for me, honestly, as really just fully serving the millions of copyrights that we already have. But we have been doing a good deal of this business out of our UK office, sync-based deals. Again, philosophically for me, I have a little bit of I want things to be more holistic. So if we did anything that we brought in, I would want it to be something that is fully supported by the A&R team and that works from, more of a broad perspective in terms of marketability, radio, touring, all of those touch points. So yeah, we can do it, but I have not as yet made it a big push for us in my term, so.
How about you?
Well, the easy answer is no, not really, because we're a large company, and I think what plays in is what the A&R strategy is and how the spend is dictated, and kind of more of a global company strategy. There have been times in the past, before Katy and a few others, where some of my staff found a band and you just know this is right on for sync because, I guess. And so we'd bring it to A&R, and there was this very natural, like, oh yeah, I'll look into it, because it came, the idea came somewhere else. So there was a bit of a sort of territorial resistance historically, I think, but I think that's changed, but we don't dictate it. And by the way, again, to my earlier comment, like, I don't want to bring something in and be like a sync rep from the standpoint of how my company is positioned, because we have catalog and estates and frontline, like, so it's a different kind of approach now. But I think now with the personalities that are there, if someone brought something that was compelling that wasn't just for sync, it'd be a different discussion. I'm not just saying that because you're here.
Now, a lot of times, as almost everyone in this room, I'm sure, knows that trends definitely come and go in sync. You don't hear as many girls with a ukulele anymore. You hear some, but not as many. So that's good. For a while in the world of trailers, everything was dubstep, and then 6 months later, all of dubstep went away in trailer world. Like, it was amazing how quick that happened. And songs that are slow, ironic, dark covers seem to be lasting way longer than anyone ever thought that they would, and I can't believe we still are having to deal with them, but we are. So my question is, when you sync folks notice a trend, something like that, like dubstep is really hot right now, is there a way for you to convey that to the A&R department, and is that realistic to think, okay, dubstep's hot, we're gonna sign a dubstep artist and get all the wheels in motion and get everything done while the trend is still hot? Like, is it even worth sync bringing trends to you guys because it takes so long? Like, what do you guys think of that?
Well, I mean, for me, we at Cobalt, we sit with the sync team in the LA office once a month, so we can kind of just really kind of have a really good flow of communication, and they'll tell us, like, these are the trends right now. Who do we have already signed that we can really kind of dig into and interface with more, that we might not that might not be doing things specifically for sync, but maybe would want to, because I think, like, we have so many resources internally already. It's like we want to start there before we're going out and spending out of pocket, giving somebody in advance, hoping we recoup, because there's a sync trend that might be over the 6 months.
Right.
So that's where I like to start. If it's like I hear of something like, hey, we have this, like, I'm always talking to Chris Lakey or Kat about, like, things they're working on, it's like, what do we have? Who do we have? What can we do? Who can I talk to about, these are my needs for X, Y, and Z. I'm like, okay, great, yeah. Doc McKinney's doing this, and like Papa John Misty's doing that. Like, you need to be talking to them about these things. So just trying to help facilitate the communication more internally instead of bringing in more business for trends that may be over soon. That's what I think about that.
Yeah, it's hard to sign something just based on a trend because you don't know where that's going to go. And to Jamie's point, we have such a big catalog that we can pull from what we already have and hopefully bring value to that.
Just so everyone gets an idea, how many copyrights are each of you working with? Yeah, I know, it's a lot. They're big numbers, that's what I want
I don't know.
How many copyrights, I mean, roughly?
I'm sorry, I really don't know.
Okay.
I don't want to.
It's a freaky
out of my
thing
ass.
because you talk about copyrights from a publishing company's standpoint, and you say, well, we have 1 million, we have 2 million, whatever the number is, but what are you really working with is a whole other thing. We all know, it's like, what's that real estate agent rule of like 20% make 80% of the money, or whatever that is.
Well, that is
I think
true
that applies to more than real estate.
Like, for,
I think it applies to lawyers too. Or
I think the
something.
real way to think of it is like what's our roster look like? How many active writers and producers do we have? Like on our global creative roster, it's around a little over 200. It's not that many people that our global team is talking to every day.
Yeah.
Now outside of that, there's people that need or don't really want any creative support. They're just like bands that make their music, and that's what they do. And that we have tens of thousands of clients, but people that we're talking to every day and that we've identified that we want to help, that they need our help, that's a much smaller number.
Yeah, no, I mean, my personal roster is about 50, but
we have many other A&R people who would probably have around that number or less.
I mean, 50 sounds like a lot to be A&Ring if they're yeah, I mean, if they're all. There's just 50 writers that are actively doing co-writes, and oh my God, that's a lot.
Well, but wait, the trend conversation, though, is interesting and a little challenging, though, because it touches on a lot of what we're talking about here, because, like, trends in sync, and that could be different things based on impact and buzz and whatever, but then, like I have two boys, 13 and 15, and they have sort of consumer trends that they're on top of because they find stuff in a way that even A&R doesn't find stuff. And there have been times where I've sent certain A&R people like, hey, my son's listening to this, so are all his friends, and here it is. And usually it's sort of that in the urban world and inappropriate and all sorts of stuff. But consumer behavior and access to music and how trends kind of bubble there versus sync trends, typically they don't align. But when they do, that's the beauty, right? Yeah, but for A&R, like, you have to kind of manage both. And that's back to my other comment of, like, I'm never going to sync most of the stuff that Zach listens to, but to bring trends to A&R at the same time, I think it's a little tricky, you know.
And one show can change that, you know, one meaningful show,
exactly.
like our friends
sync.
Across the way at their panel with Euphoria has changed a lot of what is being synced now. I think we're going to see a lot of or at least a ripple effect across what gets synced in the coming season of TV based on that one show.
Yeah.
There was a lot of the kind of music you're talking about that your kids and my kids listen to. It hadn't been getting sync, and I think that it's going to change now. I don't think that's a broader trend. That's like this kind of sleeping giant of music that wasn't being synced for a variety of reasons, and now is going to get synced.
Right. So 100% urban is really the way to go.
Yeah.
Which is another trick, but that's
I mean, I always thought, like, you know, when I started in sync, which is about 15 years ago, everyone wanted female-fronted rock that sounded like the Donnas. But it's not like you heard it on the radio. It's not like they were having #1 albums. It was really a sync thing. And I was kind of frustrated that didn't translate out because I wanted more female-fronted rock, like the Donnas, to be well.
And all the hip-hop that syncs is like Run the Jewels and like really kind of up-tempo, swaggery hip-hop that's not what you're hearing on the radio. So there is a disconnect in certain trend areas. It's.
I mean, swagger has been one of the key words that we have been having to work towards. I mean, it's like a joke. Like, if you hear swagger in a brief, it's already like the supervisors are like self-deprecating about it. Like, I know it's swagger.
Just saying it, I feel less cool. Just lost a couple cool points.
So what happens for sync? What happens when an artist is signed for whatever reason? Say that they have a really major hit. There's plenty of reasons to sign them on the A&R side and the album sales side. And they have absolutely no sync potential, and they're still going to get signed, and they're still going to be in there bugging you about it. How do you handle this? How do you handle it with management, with the A&R team, with the writers? Like, what are some of the things that you can say to kind of steer them in a direction where they'll be happy?
Well, I'm going to start with a quick story. Thanks for humoring me. I had a friend who was an A&R guy, and we had lunch all the time, and I flew to his wedding, and over a band that was all over the radio, selling out stadiums that we couldn't beg to get a sync. We lost a friendship over it, and it almost ended up in a fist fight in a bar in New York, which is funny because my last fight was in 7th grade. Like, I'm not really a fighter. And so this friendship ended, and it was terrible. And this is a band that everyone knows, and then the syncs came because of the next song. I mean, it's just really, really crazy. So I'll go back to
the worst is if you almost get in a fist fight with someone over no syncs. You calm it down, and then the syncs come. That guy is not going to learn the attitude.
Yeah, I think it goes back to how you manage the relationship. And I think with certain managers who are tough, and there are many, if you look them in the eyes, you don't bullshit them, and you show them the effort, then there's nothing to say because they're the ones that have to go back to a probably more difficult, challenging person they have to manage and be like, here are the facts. Here's what it is. And I believe them. And where do you go past that? It's an honest relationship, and you kind of. You know.
There's not necessarily a sync for every piece of music, but there's a place where you can take it to try.
Right, there's
and
a place to
it's
pitch
about the effort.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And some things, you know, if it might just be right for sports programming or for gaming or for some platform, and maybe there's a specific opportunity, and you make the effort, and you're clear in that communication with the your A&R counterpart, with the manager, with the writer, with the artist, that this is where it's going to work, and managing expectations, as always, is
I mean, yeah,
the name of the game.
I mean, as long as you unravel it, like I had a situation with a really, really hard, like, I guess, speed metal, whatever, and like, but they're huge in certain Latin American territories based on ticket sales. Like, okay, so I went to every sync department in every territory that they were touring and talked to them and got them going, and then we showed the pitches that they did in Brazil and da-da-da. And the management was like, wow, no, like, not that this was brain surgery, but like, no one's ever done that layer for us. I'm like, we engage the territories where you're selling out, and it isn't here. And there was nowhere else to go after that, and the relationship was sound.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of an assumption on the part of managers and things like that, that their band is so good, which whether or not they are, that manager is managing them because they believe they are so good. And that if we can't get any syncs for them, it's just because we're not trying hard enough. Right. And it's like, a lot of times it's the bands that we really, really do sincerely like, and we like them as people, and we like this manager, and we pitch them harder than anything else, and there just isn't the market for whatever reason.
Well, it's also like, I think it's important for us as we're signing stuff, it's like, yeah, they might have a big song, but are they willing to actually put in the work to be successful in the sync space, which means going to meetings and doing showcases and making sure that you're willing to do that, because that stuff matters. Because again, this is a relationship-based business.
Right, it matters because if you don't do it, someone else is going to do it.
Exactly.
And somebody else who sounds enough like you to fill the same spots, you know, is going to do it.
Well, and also being open to, you know, God forbid, lower fees than you would customarily take if you're a developing artist and you're trying to break a single. Finding something that might not be the big marquee look and starting to do the groundwork with, you know, lower hanging fruit, whether that's, you know, on smaller cable outlets or streaming media opportunities in programming. And I mean, I do believe that sync begets sync. If you start to get smaller looks, it can lead to bigger looks, and then you get those game changers that everybody covets.
Yeah, I always find it really interesting when there's an article in Billboard about how some, you know, whatever, Mitski or whoever, like, got a big sync and now she's a star and blah, blah, blah. Is that one of yours?
No.
Okay.
Commenting for other reasons, just inside those.
We had a column recently that I commented for in Variety about The Fame, whose album just came out yesterday. Through BMG, and Australian rock act, and did a cover of a Blondie song that got synced widely, and then it got a few other syncs. And you know, it's nice to get those things for a developing artist with an album coming, and it certainly plays into the story. But it's not like they're an overnight success because they got a software.
Well, I try to tell people, you know, when they're like, oh well, so and so got this. You know, I read it in Billboard. It's like, you read it in Billboard because it's unusual. You know, it's not, if it was an everyday thing that I could just snap my fingers and get you a sync, nobody would be writing an article about it.
Right.
So that's, you kind of, that, every time one of those articles comes out, a big one in Billboard or Variety or The Hollywood Reporter, I'm just like, oh man, now I gotta get ready for like all the similar sounding artists on my roster to be emailing me.
Managing reality.
Yes.
Yeah.
Certainly doesn't hurt, though, to have that kind of press attention and build those narratives and have those syncs that get that kind of attention in our media lanes. So
Definitely. I mean, like, you have to think about, like, I don't know, for me, like, the best example of, like, what the power of a sync can do for an artist is Lizzo. Like, whoever put that song in that scene, in that film or show on Netflix, like, Lizzo should buy them a car. Because that look, like, just breathed a whole new life into a 2-year-old song. It wasn't a single.
Because that was bouncing around for a while.
It's been out for 2 years.
Right, so that's Lizzo's an Atlantic artist, and I sit sort of in the middle of publishing and recorded music, and really, that is a really great example of a label's frontline sync marketing team doing exactly what they're supposed to do, and they delivered it. Like, that's why labels have frontline sync teams that kind of feed in with some of our departments. That is, I mean, the story is like traveled throughout the building, and rightfully so.
Yeah, I think it's like something that everyone's gonna be like, where's my Lizzo moment? Like, in the next like 10, 15 years, they're gonna be like, we need that. We need 2 characters at a show singing our song. Like,
but look at
for this minute and a half scene.
But it took her a minute to get to that moment.
She's been kicking around for 10 years,
Yeah.
you know?
She's in 2 bands, and I mean, she's like, you know. know.
I mean, it's amazing.
And got those smaller syncs along the way, and
Yeah.
here we are.
One of our biggest sync songs was Portugal the Band's Feel It Still.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, like, but you also knew it when you heard it. Like a lot of stuff we've touched on, like in 20 seconds, we're like, oh my God, this is gonna be amazing. But like, I've been at Warner Chappell for 9 years. One of my first meetings with the manager was with Portugal the Band's manager at Hugo's 9 years ago. Like this is a story, right?
Yep.
But then it's about that song and in the moment. So, yeah.
Well, they had that groundswell of support behind them that they had built over the years as a festival darling and
Yeah, they
all
are.
that sort
Well,
of
and
good stuff,
credibility.
so-
We haven't actually touched on that.
Oh,
yet, so
yeah,
they're
they
there,
were
right?
a hugely
Like,
credible indie band before they had a
yeah.
pop hit.
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, I kind of wonder about that model. I remember back when it was like, you were Beck or whoever, and you started from the ground. You started playing Jabberjaw with, between bands, and you kind of worked your way up from Bongload Records to Geffen, but you couldn't really go back down like some people are kind of doing now. Like people are getting cooler. Like you've got big pop artists, like a Miley Cyrus or someone is all of a sudden like, okay, I've done that. I'm going to work with the Flaming Lips now. So it's definitely it's definitely more of an ebb and flow in that area.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to start right and go left as opposed to starting left and going right. I think that's a much easier transition for people than being like Miley. I think is definitely I'm glad you brought her up because it's like she's grown up in the business and she started as one thing and now is something completely different in my opinion. And working with people that are help making her cooler, she's definitely incredibly talented and such a knows who she is, but she's definitely like, okay, I'm gonna work with Andrew Wyatt, and to have him produce on my record because he brings the sound that I want, Now
we're gonna switch gears a little bit. We're gonna talk briefly about a phrase a lot of you have heard, which is sync camp. And I would like to talk about it. I'd like one of you guys here to explain what a sync camp. I'm gonna let you explain what sync camp is.
No.
I can talk about it a little bit.
Jonathan's gonna explain what a sync camp is, and then
I'll explain why I said no. But yeah.
Okay, perfect. We got a structure.
Well, we just did one here a few weeks ago. Kaylee Chapman, who's on my Creative Sync team, worked closely with John Chen on our A&R team and across our LA A&R squad, and they identified writers to bring in. We got a space and 3 writing rooms, and over the course of 4 days, this curated team of writers cranked out 25 songs. They were writing to brief. They were just writing, and making demos based on, their own creative impulses. And then at the end of the week, we had a happy hour that we invited a few folks over to just meet and spend some time with these writers and played some songs in the studio and had some tequila, and it was, for the cost of one, let's say, very low-hanging fruit, 1 week promo run on a major network TV show, Sync. We got 25 pieces of music out of it that we are already getting. We have 2 or 3 of them locked in now for.
And you own the master and the pub.
And we at least own. We have the publishing, and in most cases, we're at least representing the master for the purposes of Sync, if not owning it outright.
Which makes it much easier to clear.
Yeah. So again, this gets into the. It's great for Sync thing, and it's a slippery slope. But in these cases, we were specifically going to brief in most instances.
And what are the locked-in placements? What types of placements are using songs that come from sync camps?
It's everything from there's a major studio film that is is coming by the end of the year that is we're very close on one thing, and then a couple of others are for fall TV series. So big stuff, and this stuff is generally speaking great for Sync. So it will have durability and usability beyond those specific briefs that they were written for. So it was a really eclectic group, and we just finished another one yesterday that Mariana Migliore and my team worked with. She spearheads our Sync Latin efforts, and she was down in Miami at a space that our writer Pitbull owns, and she did a Latin-focused one that was also for I think she had 20 briefs that they were writing to, and I haven't gotten the total tally on how many songs came out of that. They just had their wrap up last night. So we've done 2 this in late summer. So we hadn't done any in a couple of years, but we're getting back into that game very actively.
Yeah, we take a bit of a balance. I mean, we actually have one that's about to happen, so Katy can speak to that because she's going to the airport in a few minutes to go, as part of a bigger A&R thing. And we've done them regionally, like we have a sick person in Nashville, so we've done that with Nashville writers. But I have a bit of a different approach to it that took a minute to get going. But we actually brought in a couple of folks that are a part of our sync department that worked music houses or were music producers for jingle houses and advertising. And we saw a really great demand building several years ago for custom bespoke music, but by an artist or a writer producer where they could say, this writer who has this sort of discography wrote this for our commercial. And so it's not really a sync thing. It's like the other side of it. So we brought in a guy and we developed a roster of our writers and producers and artists who are actually able to write to picture and create custom songs, not to build a library, but situational. And they could turn around, they could turn it around, they could speak the language, there wasn't an ego about it. So we built up a roster of custom work guys. And then once that started getting out as sort of one of our sub-services, like now people come to us not because, well, if we can't license one of our songs, we can't, but like we have a bit of a custom music shop going and balancing that then with what we're doing as far as some of the writer camps. But for me, it was a little bit of a more cautious and targeted approach, and it took a minute, but it's really starting to pay off. And those experiences for those writers are great because it isn't a cattle call, it's focused, we know who does what,
They love that.
and it really is a sort of more of a qualitative thing.
Katy, are you literally getting on a plane to go to a sync camp?
I'm going to a writing camp, but we will have a sync component to it, which is really amazing. Yeah, I love sync camps and my writers love them because typically the songs that are in my catalog, my personal catalog that I pitch, typically wouldn't work in their world. You know, they're very specific. A lot of them do talk about relationships or, you know, they're things that wouldn't work. So being able to be strategic and creative and putting together the right camps for the right projects and moments, our writers are so inspired by that because it's a different thing than what they do every day.
Definitely.
I get to sit with Sync and be like, what are your priorities? What can we help deliver for you in a real strategic and creative way? And we've had amazing results and we're continuing to do them. And it's just so exciting.
When do you have to go? Like 10 minutes?
What time is
it? 10 till.
Yeah. Got 10 more minutes.
All right. We're going to open up to Q&A in a few minutes, so you can ask Katy's questions first. But I want to hear about Cobalt and sync camps.
We have a bunch of like boutique publishing companies that so the thing about Cobalt that differs us from pretty much everybody else is we don't really have any ownership in the copyright. All of our clients are signed to admin deals. So we don't do a lot of camps because we don't have really ownership in the copyright. So we're a little bit more of a lean and mean operation in that regard. But we have a lot of boutique pubcos, like Casey Truman has a publishing company called The Stable where Casey's a very well-respected supervisor, which I think all of us know, and she has shows like Riverdale, and she's got writers that are signed to her that we administer, like Sean Van Vliet from Nudes, or Danny Burke, or Sam Barbera, that are just incredible because Casey's mentored them since the beginning about how to write really well.
And she's a songwriter herself, too.
Yeah, so she knows her shit. So she's great at it. And we just had a camp last week with 2 companies I work with, Heavy Duty Projects, which is Ariel Reichstadt's publishing company, and there's a bunch of really talented guys coming up the ranks through there, and Josh Kessler, who runs it, is also like an independent supervisor, and then they partner with Prescription Songs, which is Dr. Luke's publishing company, and they had a camp all week, and they had supervisors come in every day and basically say, this is what I'm working on, and give them direction for that day. And like Katy said, it's really exercising a different part of the muscle, to have to be so specific. It's a challenge for these writers to have to think in these parameters because they don't really do that. It's like, if you could be the fly on the wall in some of these freaking writing sessions, you guys would be like, this is how it happens. Yeah. Like, are you kidding me? It's like a fly will go by and it's like, I saw a fly in my eye and, my oh my. And then boom, it's on the radio 6 months later and you're like, this is so dumb what I do for a living, but I love it. So to have to be so meticulous and methodical about phrasing and lyrics and, you know, melody and chord structure as it pertains to like writing for a certain pitch or a certain show or a commercial, whatever, it is really fun, I think, for some writers. Some writers have no interest in it, but some writers absolutely love it.
I found that a lot of times when I give writers a brief to write to, especially if it's a really specific brief, they kind of, some of them balk at it at first and they're like, I don't think I want to do this. Then they sit with it for a couple days and then they do a song doesn't get picked, and it always ends up on their album. Like, they always ends up being something that they're really proud of, and, you know. So, can an artist get signed who does not want to do sync at all, and are there any artists left who do not want to do sync?
For sure.
Like, for what reasons? They just, like, are they artists who are they not wanting to do sync?
I think there's certain types of artists, you know, and you see this a lot in the indie space, that are very particular about how they want their music, you know, out there in the world. They don't want their songs in a Corona commercial or in a Trojan commercial. You know, it's like they don't want to be associated with advertising of most things. They want to know that their music, they just want total control, which all of our clients ultimately have. Nothing's ever gonna get done without their permission anyway. So, but some artists just do not care. They just could care less, you know, but that's, again, the exception. And no,
I'm kind of nostalgic for the era. when
yeah, you're
artists
like,
were
where's the artist
reluctant
that don't want to call me every day?
Yeah,
right?
like
You didn't want to sell out.
yeah, when I started out at Bug Music years ago, a lot of my job was just persuading artists to be open to it, which is mind-blowing to consider now. But
I remember, because at Bug, I replaced Jonathan at Bug back in the day, and so I picked up like a lot of the same artists he was working with, and Bug had all these punk bands who were signed to Bug in the 80s when they were brand new. And it was like the Germs and the Minutemen and, you know, Husker Du, like really cool stuff that people wanted to use. And I remember like Bob Mould wouldn't even do any licensing for Husker Du stuff at the time. And finally, 6 Feet Under, thanks Thomas, used one of his songs, one of his new songs in something. And then you realize it wasn't that bad. You know,
Right.
trying to think.
No, we're just saying, we can't think of anyone on our roster that.
Who puts their foot
I mean, there's a
down.
conversation and selectivity and sort of on brand and all that stuff, but
Yeah,
like,
some will want to do specific.
yeah, but I don't think we
syncs,
have
but-
anyone that. But when I was at BMG, we had an artist who called, pissed off that he got a request, and he's like, I don't write my songs for Supervisor. It was like a whole thing. We're like, good to know. We'll never contact you again. But it was like a really like odd thing of like being pissed for getting a sync request. Like,
Right.
I do prize selectivity with artists when they emphasize that this is what they like, this is what they'll be open to. I like that conversation. I mean, it's important to let people know that you're open for business, but define what that business is. So I do, in step with our A&R conversations, it's about really kind of getting ingrained as much as you can and figuring out what people are open to. In some cases, it's everything goes, which
well,
is
then
fine
one
too.
step further is when you can actually, for the right reasons, through a normal, rational conversation, change their minds or get them to see it differently. Again, for the right reasons, not just money. Sometimes it is, but typically it's everything else. And truly, those are like the most rewarding moments where like you're that connected to that decision, and a no became a yes, and everyone wins.
Yeah, like the artist isn't familiar with a certain show or
Or the demographic,
yeah.
or why. I mean, they're just all those sort of intangibles, you know, or some of them are tangible.
So I think we're going to start Q&A a few minutes early so Katy can participate. So who has questions, especially questions for Katy? We're here for you.
Spotlight.
Yes.
For Pamela and Katy, of course. So as your writers are assigned to your companies, what's the best way for them to approach you if they have interest in syncing your songs and whatnot?
I mean, I think it's an organic conversation. I mean, when we're talking about signing a deal, that's one of the questions that I ask, you know, and sometimes it'll change at different moments within their career. Sometimes they won't be focused on wanting to write for sync and they're just writing for Top 40 or writing with a specific artist. And then maybe a year goes by and they don't have a lot of activity on the frontline side and they're like, okay, I'm ready now. What can we do on the sync side? And then it's up to us to work with our sync department and again, be strategic. How are we gonna help this person get into that format?
Conversely, as I said, I'm relatively new at BMG, heading up this team, but we're in the process of identifying writers and catalogs on an ongoing basis that aren't syncing as widely as we feel like they should be. And in some cases, it's that they don't want to do that kind of work, but we check in and try and figure out, like, well, maybe now is the time to kind of be more flexible for this kind of opportunity. So we're proactive in our outreach too, as much as we can be.
No, but it's actually an interesting kind of layered question, because I think in the past, I've seen examples where, sorry to put it this way, like A&R was very territorial about the relationship. This is my baby, this is my writer, and there was no access. And then a year goes by, and it's essentially a financial transaction with maybe other revenue streams, and then people point at sync, and there was never even an opportunity for a conversation. That's on all of us in a way, but I think if that doesn't quite exist the way I've seen it in the past. No. So it's that direct access, and it just has to be a very natural kind of thing.
Is it hard for a writer or a writer manager to approach sync?
No.
Not anymore.
No, not at all. I think every
that's what I'm
company is
saying,
definitely
yeah.
different, but I think all of us here, like, definitely want as much of a direct
Yeah.
relationship
I
with our
encourage my
writers
writers,
and
yeah.
our teams as
absolutely.
possible.
I'm saying open it up.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's like if you're someone that's never done it, if you're a new writer or an artist that's never really written for sync, you need to go to sync boot camp, and you need to write with the people that literally one of my writers just walked in the room who's amazing at, writing for trailers, and she's just a killer in the space. So I'll send people to go work with her that she'll actually be like, I don't know, I don't know if her voice will work, or she doesn't really understand what it is, and I have different people like that will give me honest feedback and that will help people learn the way to do it really well.
Yes.
How often are you getting customization requests for pre-existing music, and how open are your artists to working on customizing their existing songs?
It's regular. I mean, it depends on the area of sync, and it depends on obviously what it is, but it's somewhat regular, and then it's just case by case. I mean, we have some where you cannot change a single lyric, and we have others, depending on the project, like they actually want to be too involved in it and be a part of the process, and so you have to kind of balance that. But that's a pretty regular occurrence.
We have a song in the new film Abominable that BB Rexa wrote, and it was from a few years ago. And Universal wanted to make a couple of lyric changes, and she was open to it, and it's in the film. That's one that we share with Warner.
Were the lyric changes for the purpose of like the story, or was it for content? Or okay.
And they were minor, so.
Well, yeah, but then when you think about certain evergreens and there's sort of a legacy to it, you find a lot of resistance. And as we're chatting, I think about certain estates who are like, no one can ever change my daddy's lyrics. Because, by the way, there's only one of this song. The whole world knows it. Yeah. You probably maybe shouldn't screw with it, But that's a... Yeah.
But it is a regular request, and we also have been we've been doing on our team again proactive work in that frame. Like we just did Ron used the phrase trailerization earlier. We did a trailerized version of a Louis Capaldi single.
And can you quickly define trailerization for those who don't know what it means?
In this case, we had a very it's a beautiful single. It's very low key, and we just wanted to give it a bit more heft on the back end. So with our counterparts on BMG production music side, who are on a separate company, separate part of the company, separate business, but really great partners for us, we were able to build out the back end as like an orchestral kind of swell, and we're pitching that for all kinds of opportunities now. So. Stay tuned. We'll get
because an orchestral swell at the end is good for trailers. That was part of your trailerization. And then your question, sorry to back up with that, but so you were talking about trailerization in regards to his question about covers and.
Yeah, well, that's like adapting. In this case, that was adapting, changing the master recording. Not an overlay really, but a sort of a remix. So, but. In some cases it's a lyric change. In some cases it's something like that, like overlays or remixing.
Yes.
Jonathan, you just touched on production music library.
Thank you, Katy.
Oh, bye.
Have a good trip.
Bye, Katy.
Enjoy Vegas.
Safe travels.
That is some dedication, you guys.
Most major publishers have a production music library on, and I was wondering, that scenario that you mentioned, how often does that happen where the publishing side that you guys are working on coordinates somehow with the production music library side? You said it was very separate.
It's a pretty regular conversation. I think because we have proximity, we're in the same building. I can't speak to how it works at other companies, but and I just think in terms of, and this is not to slag on other production music companies or libraries, but I think we have a really good operation in terms of the quality of the work that we put out, and that's a challenging thing to do with the volume business that music libraries do. Before I was at BMG, I music supervised a series for Netflix who BMG Production Music has a pre-clear with, and I used so much stuff for the series I did.
Oh, come on, tell them what it is. It's an awesome show.
It's called Ugly Delicious. It's a food series, but we used a lot of stuff from the library, so I came in already just very enamored of what they have in terms of assets and the work that they were doing. So it's been fun, but we're I'd say we're selective. We're not willy-nilly just doing overlays and adaptations, but it's a good partnership.
Anyone else want to?
No, I mean, look, it's a balance, because in a lot of ways they're related, but they are very separate businesses, and I think the challenge is an ongoing one that's common to a lot of our companies. Like, you sit there, you're like, we deal with the same clients, we should be talking every day and trading briefs and blah, 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 and you just can't execute that, practically speaking, when you really are managing two sort of different parallel businesses.
You have the same advantage BMG does being in the same building.
Actually, no, we do, and we talk and we do our thing, but just as far as really coming together on sharing briefs and pitches, like the businesses don't quite align sometimes, even though logically you think they're so similar. But to use them for what they are experts in and doing something with a copyright and that, I mean, that's a great perk to having a library and having them in the same building or not. So I think everyone tries to do that, but the businesses just don't intersect as much as everyone would like to think sometimes.
Mike.
Hey guys. Jonathan, by the way, the fame you gotta talk about, we've got to share a song, one of your songs. It's been a minute since I've been in the major world. Used to be at Warner, Ron, we just missed overlapping, but it made me think of a question. You guys were talking about catalog versus frontline up here, so there's been sort of shifts and changes in recent years. How much of how are you guys defining catalog now, if there's been any change in 1 year, year and a half? And then what's the business like percentage-wise, say, of your sync business, catalog versus frontline, and how much of your time is spent in those areas?
The business has shifted from the standpoint of volume being more catalog-oriented to more of a blend of frontline, and I think that's a testament to the type of content that's being created. And I think a lot more television is one of the drivers to that. Whereas in the past, if you looked at commercials and film and certain television shows, it was much more sort of catalog oriented. I mean, I run all sorts of lists all the time because I try to find trends and try to see where to go this way or where to go that way. And so for several years, if you looked at your top volume sync songs, it would be in some cases 80% catalog. And now it could be 50 or 60 depending on the year and if Bruno Mars has a new song out or something. So that from that standpoint, things are definitely shifting, and you try to use that information.
What are you defining catalog as now?
What's that?
What are you defining catalog? When does something turn to be catalog versus frontline?
Well, I mean, from a publishing standpoint, that's a different thing. Obviously, there's no distinction in a way. From a recorded music standpoint, it's sort of tricky because different labels have different views to that, and I'm not trying to be diplomatic. It's just
Sometimes it's 18 months,
yeah,
sometimes it's 2 years, sometimes things have a longer.
I heard 3.5 years.
Yeah. We're in the process, actually, it's funny that you're asking this. I spent a good part of this week in conversations with my boss about doing some analysis of where we are actually in terms of frontline versus catalog in the licensing lane. So it's definitely an interesting time. There is a pivot, I think, going on in terms of the emphasis on frontline. which is exciting. And as Ron says, there's a lot of great content coming and a lot more opportunity across media lanes for us to license.
But from a business standpoint, it's challenging because if you look at trends in music years ago with singer-songwriters and rock bands, and you get a sync, you collect 100 cents on the dollar. You see what's happening with genres and just consumption, right? And so now you're working as hard or harder for 15, 20, 25, 33, 50 cents if you're lucky. So that has sort of changed the dynamic as far as how to manage a business.
Well, and those placements aren't as resonant as they were 5 years ago
Because of the
necessarily,
volume,
because you're
yeah.
up against 100 other shows now, whereas 5 years ago it was, you gotta even a network outlet like Grey's Anatomy isn't as resonant as it was 5 years ago for a particular sync.
No, I
they're
try
still
to
great,
get-
and we still want them.
I try to get cute with our CFOs, and I say flat is the new up, and then we kind of like growl at each other and walk away. But by the way, flat is not the new up. Up is up. But
Yes.
Question about sync camps. What have you guys learned from the process of doing them over time? What things have you learned to optimize success of sync camps, and where have you had failures in the past, or anyway?
I can't really speak to over time because I really this is my first go around with doing them as actively as we are. So I know we have done them in the past. They tended to be more specifically, like we did a couple that were show specific for to help that particular music supervisor across a season, which ended up having kind of mixed results. I think for our purposes, philosophically, the way we're doing them now, it is more of a holistic approach. Like there are a lot of briefs that are being written too, but it is about building stuff that's durable and adaptable outside of that specific writing assignment. So.
well, I think it's knowing your writers, and so because for me, I've been a little, like I said, cautious about it because I don't want to build a dusty library, frankly. I think that's a waste of everyone's time, and diminishes kind of the value of all the other music in a way too. So I think knowing your writers and putting them in the right sort of writing opportunities for sync in a sync camp, whatever you want to call it, then you kind of get the best product.
Yes.
With your need for more urban music and sync, are you guys looking to do more camps in Atlanta where we have more urban music development? Is that something you guys are looking to do in the near future?
I think clearable urban music is something that everyone needs more of, because with hip hop and R&B, and the same in pop, there's sometimes 4, 5, 7, 10 writers on a song. Hip hop can be sample heavy at times. So there are a couple producers that we have that do it really well. And it's just they know the sound because they've had cuts with big, hip hop artists. We have this producer C4 who's amazing, and he was a hip hop producer, he was part of a duo, and then he wrote something for sync once and it went, and he was oh, this is so much easier, and I own a master, and I can make so much more money, and I don't have to deal with artists.
That's
or
the worst when they
labels
get a sync on their first try, then it's your expectations are just blown out.
He was just you know what, screw it, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna sign my own artists, I'm gonna co-own the master with whoever I do things with, and he's made a really successful business for himself because he knows the sound and that's his background. So I think you're starting to see more producers. I work with this guy Sham, who was again more on the hip hop, production side of things, and now he's seen how once you get it down, it's easy. It's not always easy, we've all been saying how hard it is basically for an hour and a half to get syncs, but because there's less people that just do it in the hip hop space for sync, I think it's definitely more of and the lane's a little more open than it is in the pop space, in my opinion. Would you guys agree?
Well, yeah, but I think, again, to the earlier point of you can't just throw 5 people in a room and say write for sync, so knowing who it is, what they contribute, how they write, and making it practical as well, meaning maybe it's 2 guys, maybe it's 3 at the most. You need to kind of factor in some more just because there is a practical sort of business aspect to it. So again, it's just about knowing who you're working with and kind of putting them in the right place.
We've definitely been talking about doing a camp in Atlanta at some point upcoming.
I'm a staff engineer at Patchwork Recording Studio. I've done several of them. They've been pretty productive.
Yep.
So I'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be something we're going to be seeing a lot more of across our industry. So
So we have time for one more question. Who's got it?
Chris, I think you kind of touched on it. Do you guys like some of your like classic catalog songs that might get synced, like say, say there's an Elvis or something, but something that you're able to go in and maybe revamp and have producers or someone come in and kind of put a different twist on it? Is that something you guys do? Or?
Totally. Yeah, I mean, we that's a lot of what the proactive conversations we're having with catalogs that for whatever reason, either they've become regarded as, forbidden fruit in terms of the fees or how much they get overused, or they get a reputation for not being licensable. And we get into those ingrained conversations with estates, with managers, directly with the writers in some cases, if it's an iconic catalog where the writer is still active and around, about getting in there, rolling up our sleeves, figuring out what they're open to, whether it's, remixing or reworks or overlays, and just getting creative. We're all about that. So
there's a fun element to it. Like, it'd be really cool to hear this song done by this artist who's also one of your writers or whatever. Like, this would just be a great fit. And if they do it, they do it. And we've relicensed stuff like that all the time. But it's just because it was really just an artistic connection.
They look like Lionel Richie, across the door, they'll come in and do an album of other songs with their own take.
Yeah.
That seems kind of cool.
Yeah.
All right, you guys, I've been getting the wrap it up sign, so thanks for coming. And enjoy the rest of your day. Big thanks to our panelists.